All right. Hi, Mary. So good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thank you for agreeing to this interview. So, today we're going to talk about your movie that you made that's called Am I Crazy?
Am I crazy? My journey to determine if my memories are true.
Ah, beautiful. My journey to determine if my memories are true. So, that gives us some idea of how that title came to you. Can you talk a little bit about that, your journey to?
Yeah, I the title came to me when I was taking a class, a documentary class on uh, with the anticipation of doing a personal documentary. And at the same time, I was pursuing the possibility of writing a memoir. So I was applying to a MFA program for the memoir, a master's in fine arts. And I was learning about with the documentary, I needed to have not just like, I'm going to tell my story, but I needed to have some kind of hook, or, it wouldn't really be a good documentary. So I had that knowledge. And then applying for the MFA, I wrote an essay and, submitted it. I was told, they actually liked it well enough, but thought that it needed to be better written, which is kind of interesting. I couldn't learn how to write better without writing better. But I do understand a master's in fine arts when I don't have a degree in journalism is kind of a lofty idea. So they let me rewrite it. And then after I did, they accepted me and then changed their mind and didn't accept me. So I actually got word that I was accepted and word that I wasn't accepted on basically the same day. What I think happened, what may have happened, is that they realized that for some people, recovered memories are controversial. And I had written my essay about something that happened to me when I was 8. They ended up asking for proof of that. Like, well, how I took it was proof, but like they wanted to know something that they wanted police records. They wanted, or names of, there were other victims, names of other victims, or, criminal records, whatever. Newspaper articles. I didn't have any of that. I was 8 years old. None of my perpetrators have ever been apprehended that I know of. And I know 20 to 30 of the people who raped me, I would know through church connections or family connections, if they had been arrested, and no. And my parents were never arrested on any counts. So I was abused by a lot of different people as a child. But, when you're a victim, you don't have that kind of proof. And since they weren't apprehended, since it remains secret, there's no newspaper articles or. So I took it as them not believing me. I don't know if that was the case. I do know that if you write an essay from a child's point of view, the information in it is what the child would know. So at any rate, I decided that I didn't think they believed me and I was going to hire a private investigator because I didn't like just not being believed. But when I thought about how much that would cost and how unlikely they're going to solve a crime that happened in 1963, 1964, anyway, I woke up one morning and thought, am I crazy? That's the name of the film. Am I crazy? If they think these memories aren't true, in essence, they're saying, that I believe something for over 20 years is not true. I took that to be a statement about my mental health. And I don't know. I mean, to believe something that's false for that long, I mean, to be inaccurate about my entire childhood. This wasn't just a one thing, but even if it had been, to be inaccurate about that. So I decided I was going to ask people who don't believe my memories are true. I was going to let them question me in any way they wanted. I was going to go talk to people who remind me of my parents. But my parents were deceased, so I couldn't talk to them. So that's what the film was. And when I decided that, I just decided to give it my all. I was going to totally question. And I did that in a number of different ways. One was reading material that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation put out, but it also was interviewing people who are leaders, were leaders in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
I am just so, I don't know what the word is, full of gratitude and admiration for your courage to
Thank
meet,
you.
to meet this head on, because it's so often the case that survivors, when they talk about their childhood abuse, are not believed.
Right.
That's the whole, from your movie, for me, it was very encouraging and bolstering, to see
Thank
that
you.
you went and spoke to, in a sense, the very people who were telling you that your memories were false or that you were crazy, delusional, that kind of a thing, that survivors get met with, because so many people choose to believe that children are not reliable reporters of their own experience in childhood.
Right. Right. I think it definitely extends past anything to do with recovered memories, because people with continuous memories aren't believed either.
Right. I have a feeling that they'll just pull anything out of the hat to try to make it stick, to try
Right.
to discredit. So just that you would say, okay, I'm going to meet the bull by the horns.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so talk a little bit about that, about how, I know who you interviewed because I've seen the movie twice.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't wait to watch it again. And so talk about that. I know you interviewed Elizabeth Loftus. Tell us who she is and what that was like.
Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. Yeah, she was on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And I should explain the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, because it's hard to believe there's actually an organization with that title, which it did close in 2019. But while I was making the film, it was in fact a nonprofit organization in the United States. And there's still,
your film must have knocked them off the plane.
I don't know. I didn't have that much to do. No, I didn't have any.
Well,
Yeah,
I like to think that synchronicity,
I know. Yeah. But there is still, and I don't want to give the impression this isn't an issue anymore, because there is still a British False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And
sorry to hear that.
sadly, I just met someone over the internet whose abusers are trying to get the right to have access to her children, based on saying that her memories are false. So this is a very real situation, a very current situation for people, especially I understand in Australia and well, in places, the United States, I think Dr. Loftus may not have as much influence, although, I say that, and she testified in the Weinstein trial. She testified for the defense in the Harvey Weinstein trial. And she was hired by Bill Cosby's defense team. She didn't end up testifying, but she was hired by them. And she was willing to say that all the women had inaccurate memory. I mean, Bill Cosby was accused by many different women, and that all those women had inaccurate memory. So yeah, it's a really I would say scary organization, a scary belief system, because it is used to silence survivors. I'm really glad I wasn't silenced. I'm really glad I did it. So yeah, I talked to Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. She is the person who did the mall study, where which has been used incredibly. But I don't know if you realize there were only 24 subjects in the mall study. 24 subjects, and what they did was they tried to show that you could convince someone that something that is false is true. But they really didn't, it was really borderline as far as convincing people. It was very borderline. But the thing they did that is very different than a counselor could do is it was all an older relative talking. The research subjects were told, your older brother told me about the time you and him went to the mall and you got lost, or your mother told me, or your some older relative. Well, then they're having to say that their older relative was, hadn't reported correctly. I mean, it's not at all like what a therapist could say. A therapist can't say, I was there when you were sexually abused and this is what I remember. It
Right. Yeah.
can't be done. So
Flawed.
it wasn't even at all connected with with traumatic memory. But the other thing it wasn't connected, that other thing of someone you know and trust was there and said this happened. That's very powerful. And to make it seem like a counselor can convince a client of something, I just can't. There's no relationship between those two situations. So she got quite famous with that study, and she testified in many cases, and as you can tell, she still does, because Harvey Weinstein was obviously very recent. But she testified in the Lynn Crook trial. Lynn Crook is in my film. She's a survivor, and she sued her parents and won. But Dr. Loftus testified that Lynn's memories were not accurate, but the judge believed Lynn. So that's a part of my film. And another, on the positive side, I also interviewed Marilyn Vanderbier. She was Miss America in 1958. And she's just a wonderful, lovely person. I was so pleased. I interviewed her by telephone, and she also let me use footage. I'm so glad she was in it. And she's been, she's someone who people with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation say her memories aren't true, even though Marilyn has a sister who's always remembered.
And Marilyn is also very poised. So she, she's very convincing, believable. I read her memoir, her book about it. And I just, in this time now, as opposed to the early 90s when the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created, or late 80s, now we're very familiar with gaslighting.
Right. And the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, I believe it's either 1991 or 1992 that they were founded. So very much. I have
personal experience with that too, because I disclosed to my siblings about the abuse around the 90, 91, 92. And one family member joined the False Memory Syndrome Foundation and I was completely not prepared for that. I was very naive at that time, just thinking, oh, finally, I've got the key.
Yeah.
What's been going on in this whole very difficult family situation with a lot of disorder, dysfunction, and emotional pain and all of that. So
Mhm.
I became familiar with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation
Right.
too soon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and I feel like they have done a lot to
Oh,
suppress the truth coming out.
absolutely.
A lot of harm, actually, because
It's
it's
a
hard
huge amount
enough.
of harm.
Yeah, it's
I know
hard enough.
someone who really blames her sister's suicide on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, specifically on Dr. Loftus, because her sister, was abused as a child, and then obviously that's hard. But then when she comes out and isn't believed, and comments Dr. Loftus makes, it just hurt her too much. So yeah, I'm really glad to have made my film, and for survivors to be able to see it and use that as a form of comfort.
Yeah, and that Lynn Crook actually won her lawsuit because I
She
remember
did.
that from back then in the
She
news.
did.
Yeah, she was in Florida, right? And just yeah, it's
No, she's in Washington State. I'm in Bellingham, Washington, which is north of Seattle. But yeah, she lived in just a different part of Washington State.
okay. For some reason, I
Yeah.
thought they were
Mhm.
so good. So let's go back to the movie then. And I was curious to know, did you have a clear vision for it from the beginning, or did it kind of evolve over time? Like, did you just suddenly get this idea, I'm going to do this movie and talk to the people who are discrediting me, like meet them head on? I mean, how did that evolve for you? That must have been quite a process.
That was my idea. I was going to talk to the people who don't agree with me. I'm not sure. I think I decided after I talked to them, then I talked to people who do agree with me. I don't think, I think my idea was that I would just talk to people who didn't agree with me. And oh, it was really hard. And in a way,
So hard.
yeah, it was so hard. I was so nervous. Oh, that first interview, I was so nervous. And um, Yes, one of the interviews, my first interview, is not in this version of the film, but I'm doing a revision of the film that is expanded, and it has my first interview in it. And it's someone else from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, but oh, I was so nervous. But then when I went and talked to them, they didn't have any questions I hadn't already asked myself. Because when I remembered, I was a clinical social worker, I was a forensic social worker. I did custody evaluations, child custody evaluations. When the mom and dad couldn't agree on custody, then I would go in and do the research. But I had to testify in court to each of my case to if they still couldn't agree once I wrote my report, then I would need to testify in court. And I I asked my question. I asked myself all the questions I would have asked one of my clients, and I was really good at it. I would ask all kinds of questions, and I'd already asked myself all those questions. I'd ask myself all the kinds of questions I knew I knew what it was like to be cross-examined, and I'd already asked myself all those questions. So nothing new came up, and it just really was. It just helped me to know I'd already thought through this. I'd already thought through it quite well. But I did learn something about myself that I had not known, and that had to do with the grief process or anger process or forgiveness process, whatever word you want to use, related to my father. And so some of the footage is of me going to my parents' grave.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a beautiful sequence there where you're really opening your heart and talking with them, and yeah, it's quite lovely. And I feel like it's something that it's a part of this recovery process at some point.
Yes.
We want that a level of I would say, reconciliation with our own story in a way.
Uh-huh.
And
Definitely.
for me, I would say closure on um, the extremity of the trigger response. Kind of you can
Yeah.
calm ourselves down at
Yeah.
that point. We can choose that path because
Yes.
you're holding that space for yourself, being
Mhm.
seen and heard, and you're coming more from your full adult self at that stage.
Yeah.
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 So it's just so powerful what you're doing.
Thank you.
I do
Yeah, it was very healing for me.
Yeah. So, do you see your film as part of what I would call the essential activism of our times, just to speak truth to power, to debunk
Yeah,
the
yes, I would say so. Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think any power, you know, our relationship to power does usually have to do with our childhood and our parents. So yeah, I do think that's been a part of it. I also wrote an essay that um, about well, I wrote an essay which is on my website about Black Lives Matter, and I won't go into that more, but if anyone wants to see it, it's on my website, available free.
yeah, so some parallels there in terms of uh, being treated with autonomy and respect, and children being believed, and anyone who's been oppressed having a voice, and being some abuses being redressed is what we're
Yeah.
really looking for. As kind of what I'm feeling like is part of it's a big part of the times that we're in. That's so
Mm-hmm.
important, is to bring all this forward and and have some actual change happen. Some real
Yeah.
cultural transformation. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So so we've covered a lot. We just kind of went right into all the materials, the questions. I wanted to ask you if you feel to answer this question, because you and Marilyn Vanderbier both are two women I know of who experienced childhood abuse and serious abuse, and now have happy marriages, or
Oh
support,
yeah, yeah. I have a good marriage.
because a tendency for survivors to have that repetition compulsion, or to repeat the same kind of patterns, maybe marry someone who's not suitable or not really.
Yeah, and I do, again, on my website, I have a film about my first marriage, but the marriage, um, the love of my life, I met in 2009, and we got married in 2010. So we've been married 11 years now, and we're very happy.
He's
So I do have a really happy ending, and I think that helps because I do talk in my film about, uh, in detail about at least one uh, abuse situation. So yeah, I have a happy marriage now, and um, also want to mention that Dr. Vanderkolk is in my film, which many people know him from his book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I'm really glad I was able to interview with him, and that's a part of the film that a lot of people like.
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah, very much so. So, can you advise survivors that might be watching your movie, or following your career, uh, how that each one of us, wherever we live, can build a supportive community around ourselves and other survivors? Because I feel like your film can help do that, and you know, doing the interviews can help do that. Like really a groundswell of support for survivors.
Well, one thing I want to say is anyone who watches my film, I'll have a one-time phone call with them free of charge, or Zoom, if they're out of the country. And I actually just did that yesterday with someone from the UK. I've talked to people in Australia and Germany, various places, and as well as people in the United States. So you can contact me through my email address, and then we can schedule a time for a phone call. So that's something that, I offer to make it more individualized. I know one person who took me up on that. We spend the time, she asked questions about counseling and how did I find a counselor, and she happened to be someone in the same town I was living, so I actually had some specific ideas. But so part of it is an individual answer as to how to find the support. Another part of it, there is so much available over the internet, and groups, Facebook groups like yours are important.
While We Were Silent page on Facebook is what you're referring to.
Yes, While We Were Silent page on Facebook. And those private Facebook pages are really helping build communities. The thing I've done when I meet someone on a group like that is I just say, would you like to talk? And so one of my friends I met just over the internet, she's a survivor of extreme abuse, and she lives in Manhattan, which we live at the clear other side of the United States. And she's a really good friend. She's one of my best friends. So that's a nice thing. I mean, it's been hard because of the pandemic. We can't get in touch with each other in person, but there's been a lot of good building community over the internet. And so that's one thing I recommend. But also, I guess, building community. One thing that I did when I left my first marriage is I got into a group for women who had experienced domestic violence. And that really helped me. I think women's groups are very important, and finding out what your community has available through Right Crisis or through grief groups. And it's always hard for survivors to be able to afford all they need to do to get well. I do offer my film to survivors who can't easily afford it. I offer that free of charge. Finding a group is really important, and letting go of individuals or groups that don't serve you is also real important. Another thing I would mention as far as a group is Al-Anon. That's free, and they tend to be really healthy groups, and survivors tend to be codependent and focused on other people. So Al-Anon can get you focusing on yourself, your own healing, your own. For me, the Al-Anon way of life helps to let me focus on my own happiness and not feel like I have to focus on other people all the time. So I'm saying these things because I know how expensive recovery is. And some of the people listening to this may have very limited resources. And so that's why I talk about the ones that are least expensive. But psychotherapy is so important, and finding a way to find affordable psychotherapy is something I also recommend.
And the right match with
Yeah.
a therapist, finding a therapist that resonates, that you resonate with.
Oh, yeah. It's so hard to find that good fit, and so important.
I'm very invested in the somatic aspects of healing. So that's why I became an EFT tapping practitioner.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's so powerful for working with that deep trauma that's encoded in the cells and in the nerves to really move it through.
Yes, I think somatic body work. Another thing that really helps me is yoga. I mean, as far as an inexpensive thing to do, I can use yoga in kind of the same way as massage, but I will say I really need massage. So finding a way to afford that if possible. I think something I like to say right now is finding all these tools for recovery. Just think about if your child had the same problems, would you find some way to get your child help? And most survivors are so compassionate toward their children, and it's a matter of becoming compassionate toward yourself in the same way you are toward your child.
Beautiful. Well said. Yes, totally agree with that. And I've had at times clients who kind of, I guess decompensate is the word, where they start attacking themselves emotionally or, criticizing themselves. It's always coming back to be kind to yourself.
Yes.
I find be kind to yourself is sometimes easier for people to implement than love yourself, because that's so big. But being kind to yourself opens the path to loving yourself. It kind of is loving yourself.
That's a good way. I like that. I really like that way of thinking. How can I be kind to myself today? Seems less overwhelming than how can I love myself?
Yeah, it's a little more doable. It's more grounded.
Yeah,
Because
I like that.
and love is a big and can be very
It is.
confusing word, actually, because we love ice cream, or we love a movie or whatever. It just has so many. It gets used in so many casual ways too, then it's big. Because I remember years ago seeing a healer, and she had a reputation of just helping people, like, my hip works now and my dog is all better. And I went to see her, and she just sat me in a chair, walked around me and pointed at me, and she said, you need to learn to love yourself. And that was the end of the session. And I went home and I went, well, I'm not arguing with that, but how?
Mm-hmm.
So years later, it came to me to start a self-kindness, self-compassion practice.
Oh,
And
that's really good.
yeah, that
That's
really
really good.
began the process for me, because I did mirror work, go stand in the mirror and say, I love you, for 5 minutes straight. It didn't really
Mm-hmm.
accomplish much. It was just a kind of
Mm-hmm.
talking head in the mirror. For me, it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started practicing self-compassion and self-kindness, that I could know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a huge leap.
And related to that, I want to say, since we're preparing for the watch party, that some parts of the film are really hard to watch. And if you get to those points, I encourage you just to turn off the film. But maybe you could still come to the Q&A afterwards. Don't feel like you have to watch the whole film in order to come to the Q&A. And if you need to stop watching the film, but you want to see it all, I'll give you a code so you can see it free later, because I just really believe that many survivors who have benefited from it can't watch it from start to finish. They need to watch it maybe in as many as 3 or 4 segments.
That's what I did. I actually stopped it and started it again several times. I stopped it and went out and took a walk and regulated my breathing and got oriented, because it was bringing up some strong feelings of my own.
Yes.
Yeah. So being really gentle, it's so good to be gentle with ourselves, and nobody has to power through. That's not, most of us, or a lot of us, powered through survival as children.
Right.
So we may have a tendency to do that. But it's in this case and now, and especially you can pause the movie and then come back later. So even during the watch party that we'll do on Facebook Live, that we'll do live, people can walk away or turn the sound off for a while, or they need to do. So I did end up, I've watched it twice so far. So, and I just feel like I got so much out of it. And what I really took away was just such, not just admiration for the project and your courage, but also it strengthened me.
Yeah.
To even like reach out to you to do these interviews and to start to find a new way to talk about it and think about it. And I feel it's very important for community, for this, the taboo on childhood sexual abuse is so strong that we have to kind of work against that, right?
Right.
That to like, it's great that it's taboo to do sexual abuse to children. Not so great that it's taboo to talk about it when it has happened. So to get those distinctions and to really validate ourselves and hold a space where we can do that together, I think it's very strengthening.
Yes.
So yeah, even watching your film, I was like, yes, yes. And then I connected with Lynn Crook on Facebook and other women in the movement who I've known of for years, or through reading their books or whatever. So if I felt like, oh, here, we're still here,
Yeah, we are.
This is 30 years later.
I know, isn't it?
So well, thank you so much. And we will do the watch party on the While We Were Silent page, and we'll set that up and we'll announce it through that web page and give you that information. And it looks like it's going to be next week sometime. So
good.
Great. So
thank you.
Anything else you'd like to share with us about the movie or how it's impacted your life, or did it free you up?
It helped me realize that most people believe me.
Sweet.
Really, most people do. There's so few who don't. And especially if you take out the people in some way related to my perpetrators, there's just very, very few people who don't believe me. I think as survivors, we get the impression people don't believe us, but there's so many people who do.
Oh, that's beautiful. And why on earth would anyone make up a story like that? Who would want this for their story if they had experienced it? I can't imagine that happening other than extremely rarely in some other kind of bizarre situation. I mean, anybody who would do that would be under some duress for sure. So always seemed like a ridiculous notion to me that somebody would make these things up. Or want, as a certain recent president said, want to be famous. Who wants to be famous for having suffered such horrific abuses and experiences? That's so ridiculous. So I do feel like we've had, in these last 5 years or so, we've had a good collective lesson in gaslighting. So we can be much more savvy to how narcissistic behavior is simply just redirect and change the subject, and it's like bulldozing through a sensitive topic with distractions. And so
I guess the last thing I want to say is, if someone wants to start watching it before the watch party, let me know and I'll give you a promo code, because if you have a sense you may need to stop, then might as well just start before the rest of us.
So beautiful, great.
And the other thing I want to make sure to say is it's available with closed caption if someone has difficulty hearing. It's available English closed caption, as well as German, Polish, and Spanish subtitles. It's in Polish subtitles, thanks to this gentleman in Poland who's just like, is it okay if I translate it? So, there were a few people involved in the German translation, and then also Spanish. So I want it to be available to a lot of different people.
Well, thank you for being so generous. And I really see the film and all the work you're doing as a great gift of healing for not just survivors, but the whole culture, really. It's so much needed and appreciated. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And do you want to go ahead and just give the audience now your email address on the
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's maryknighthappy@yahoo.com. That's my last name is spelled with a K, Knight. So maryknighthappy@yahoo.com. And my website is www.maryknightproductions.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. I look forward to seeing the movies
Thank you.
as they come out. And yeah, the next step, the watch party. Really looking forward to
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you for spending time with us today and
Yes.
sharing about the process. It's great to get behind the scenes a bit. So, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.